Hello, and welcome to the first of our CMO discussion series as part of Mr. President's Brand Alignment Gap report. And I am delighted to have Nathan Harrington with me, the head of brand at Aldermore Bank. Welcome, Nathan. Hello, lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you, Nick.
Now, Nathan is someone who comes with a ridiculous amount of experience in managing and transforming brands in the financial services sector. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you've worked with Halifax, Allianz, Lloyds, GoCompare,
Yes.
Aldermore.
Yes.
I've probably missed
Yes.
some along the way there.
It's a good list. Some large, I suppose, some small brands and some more specialist versus some fairly broad brush high street names. Absolutely.
Well, as someone who's spent a large chunk of my career working with financial services brands, it's nice to see someone who is kin in that regard. But given your vast experience across a number of these FS brands, it'd be really good to kick off by just getting your perspective of how brand is perceived and applied across organizations and how you have personally tried to change that.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think very relevant right now, especially in the evolving world of AI that we find ourselves in. I think it's fair to say that brand is perceived very differently and understood very differently across sort of the gamut of businesses I've worked for. When I think back to the days of GoCompare, a monumental brand by anybody's standards in the UK, there was a fundamental understanding there that brand was about being top of mind, being in people's memory at the moment of need, which when you look at brand in its purest sense, that's kind of what brand building really is, right through to some which see brand very much as the sort of tactical, creative end of the marketing spectrum. But I think for me, that kind of misses the point to some degree. And I think it comes down to where you as a marketeer, as a brand marketeer really sit, which is brand the wrapper that sits around activity and tries to bring everything into that sort of consistent, coherent whole? Or is brand really the galvanizing idea that sits at the heart of everything that you do, but then drives that relentless focus and culture to really be I suppose, the thing or the proposition that a business ultimately claims that it wants to be? And I'm firmly in that sort of second camp. I think if we look at brands that see it very much as a wrapper, that's where the proposition never really lives up to the experience. And you see that play out today on Trustpilot, on Reddit, on TripAdvisor, if it's travel, etc. And even down to things like Twitter or X as it's now called. And that is where you see a real disconnect between what a brand promises and what it claims to do and be versus the experience. And that is symptomatic of businesses that don't really view brand as being the sort of what I tend to use, which is the Jeff Bezos quote, which is brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And therefore it is that collective of internal, external. Yes, it's creative, it's messages, but it's also your EVP, your culture, your colleague behaviors. It's everything that you do that ultimately impacts on a colleague, a customer, or the broader community or society which a business operates in. And that to me is where most businesses don't really get it, because brand is typically structured and sat in a marketing function, and that in some ways does limit its potential or its understanding and adoption across that sort of C-suite table.
Why is that? I mean, I'm totally in line with what you're talking about. It seems strange that all of these years that brand marketing has been part of a business structure in the most fundamental way, but yet there's still many organizations which like to partition it off as this little cosmetic exercise on the side, as opposed to something which makes the whole organization tick. I mean, what is it that you've experienced within the organizations that sort of led to this disconnect happening?
Yeah, I think it's many things. I think in part it's connected to businesses being, inherently short-termist in their focus. That's due mainly to, chasing year-end numbers, financial reporting, committed objectives, committed budgets in year. Connected to that, I think, is that any brand investment is officially registered as operational expense, not capital expense. So for most CFOs, marketing and all brand activity has to wash its face in year. That's tricky for any brand investment. Yes, there will be some that pays back in the short term, and we see that in the long and short of it, etc. But proper brand investment is multi-year payback. Technology can be amortized over many years. Buying office furniture can be amortized over many years, and yet marketing investment, specifically brand investment, that is long-term aligned and long-term payback, always has to wash its face in year, and that in part then challenges the understanding and belief internally around should we be doing this. And I think it also then reinforces this sort of performance marketing mindset or sort of drug, as I call it, because the transparency of performance marketing is almost too good to be true. So anything that isn't that transparent immediately fails to meet the benchmark. And that's tricky. That is hard for a CFO to, I guess, recognize that multi-year, for many businesses, multi-million-pound investment doesn't pay back in year. That's a difficult conversation and a difficult argument to win.
It's one which I think we've all experienced, isn't it? This idea of performance as this addictive drug that
it is, yeah,
hooked onto. But it's one of those things that's always bothered me over the years, that there seems to be this very clear delineation between something which is doing a performance role and something which is doing a brand role. And there's this sort of perceptual chasm between the two. I mean, across all these organizations that you've worked with, when you're doing SEO or digital performance or, affiliate marketing, that they're seen as things which are just beholden to how you deliver conversion by channel. And then it's almost like, well, there's no brand role for this. And is that a helpful distinction for people to have in their minds, or is there a way to marry those two up together?
Yeah, I think we'd all recognize that is, for many organizations, how marketing is delivered today, and it's how budgets are often set, and it's even how teams are structured and specialisms and roles that those teams then create and hold. And it's a very live debate. I see it everywhere on LinkedIn currently, and these things tend to go in cycles. And maybe AI is prompting some of this continued debate, and I'm sure we'll get on to that. It isn't helpful having that split between brand activity and performance activity. And there's a tried and tested argument and lots of coverage around, is it brand or performance, or brand and performance? And part of, in my mind at least, part of the solution lies in the labeling of this activity, because we as a profession kind of label it as two things when nobody outside of our profession sees it as two things. Customers don't think like it's two things. And therefore, do we give ourselves a hard time, and do we make it difficult for ourselves and put ourselves on the back foot by labeling it as these two things? Because performance marketing, bottom of the funnel, it's sales capture. It's capturing demand that is already there. And statistically, we're talking probably 5% of anybody in market at any given time. But for many organizations, if we capturing that 5% is enough. And if you're a specialist business, or you're a small organization, or you're a business in a very large market, you could potentially hit your numbers in that 5%. So the challenge then of, well, why would we even look at the 95% becomes even more difficult, because the business can fill its cup, for want of a better phrase, without having to think about that 95% of people who aren't in market. Interestingly, in the B2B space, which is where I think many businesses struggle even more, because B2B decisions are seen as rational and cold and all about the product and all about the technical spec of whatever it is that's being purchased. Of course, the reality is completely the opposite, which is it's about ensuring you make the right decision. You're not going to get into any trouble internally for choosing the wrong supplier. I mean, it's the old quote, isn't it? Nobody got fired for buying IBM. IBM is not the best product out there. It's not technically the best, but it's a brand that most people would happily say, well, we bought IBM because we trust IBM. So I think there is healthy debate to have around, is it brand, is it performance? Do we just call it something else? I don't think labeling it funnel marketing is the answer either, because A, I think we lose people internally on that, and B, customers don't think like that. And funnels have got completely crushed now anyway. Somebody can go through an entire funnel in seconds. Um, but I think there is definitely a reframing needed in my mind to help internal audiences, and especially exec leaders, understand how to drive sustained demand, and pipeline in a business. 5% is fine if you can make that work, but that 5% normally have already decided who it is they're going to buy from. In
Yeah.
B2B, it's even more stark. So I think Kantar quote 57% of B2B buyers have already made their decision on who they're buying from before they start their process. LinkedIn have got research that says it's over 80%. So you kind of think, well, your performance marketing, if we're going to continue with that label, has to work phenomenally hard, probably harder than it would otherwise need to convince somebody to pick you over someone else. And that's why we're in this kind of constant price product battle, because that's easy and
Yeah.
it's quick and it's transparent, but it erodes margin.
It feels like such a fantastical idea always to me when you actually look at it through the customer's point of view, that they are presented with a very stark looking link or flat banner saying buy
Mm.
me, and people are going purely off what they're seeing in that particular moment in
Yes,
time,
yeah,
that they
which
are
is
going to get a
nonsense, isn't it?
mortgage with another bank. And it's just like it's madness that they aren't actually bringing to the party a
It
greater
is.
understanding of what they've already got.
And I think it's more acute in financial services, because if the one thing that financial services require to be successful is trust.
Yep.
If you're not a trusted brand in FS, it's very difficult to convince somebody to choose you. And yes, from a banking perspective, things like FSES do level the playing field. So if you're saving anything up to, I think it's 120,000 now, your savings are safe. Lovely, but that just becomes the new benchmark. It doesn't help anybody, because most banks, in fact, pretty much all banks will benefit from that. So it becomes just hygiene, and you're not a trusted brand if people haven't heard of you. People are inherently, I suppose, critical, inherently cynical, and you see that today. It's proven that the biggest brands are the most successful brands. That is statistically proven.
Yep.
And yes, there is I think it's double jeopardy, as Byron Sharp would call it, but we can't expect people to choose a brand and make big decisions. And we don't know how big these decisions are for customers. It might, in our minds, be a relatively minor decision, but for that customer, it could be the biggest decision they make this day, today, this week, this month, whatever. We can't expect somebody to read something on a banner and think, yes, that's for me. I'll click it and I'll buy it, or I'll apply. The world doesn't work like that. People have never thought like that. Why do we now think that that's how customers think and act? All the insight is there to tell us otherwise, but yeah, it's chosen to ignore because of this inherent, I suppose, sort of frenzy of feeding on this bottom of funnel activity.
I mean, is it not symptomatic of the organisation's way of thinking? Because I love the quote of "You'll never be fired for choosing IBM," but is it also true within an organisation you'll never be fired for adding in an incremental performance marketing capability into your stack?
Yes,
Because it's like, well, it's easy to justify. It's like, if I buy this new platform or I adopt this new approach, I am promised to get X number of incremental sales
yes,
directly
yes,
from it. And you could go
yes.
ad infinitum to keep on piling on these
Absolutely. Yeah,
special.
absolutely. And I think it comes back to the role of either a CMO or a marketing leader in an organization to be less inward looking and to be more, uh, I guess, organizational wide in terms of building the story for what full marketing capability needs to deliver, but also leaning more into, I suppose, the narrative of marketing and brand in particular being that sort of growth engine. And you don't grow by throwing more money into the bottom of the funnel. You grow by feeding the funnel with more activity. And it
Yeah,
does come back to, I suppose, what is the role of marketing and what is the role of a brand? The role of a brand is to make the business successful. Amazon, yes, it's a very different beast now, but in its early days, didn't really have a brand assessment. God, I remember when all you could buy on Amazon was books. Shows my age. And Jeff Bezos built Amazon with that obsession about customers. They're obsessed about customers now as they were then. Maybe slightly differently today in terms of the experience and the capability, but having that absolute crystal clear understanding of your target market, their needs, wants, behaviors, really means that marketing can then lean into that and be that growth engine. Around the exec table, marketing should be the closest to the current and target customer base that they can be. If marketing can do nothing else, it has to be the voice of the customer in the room on major decisions, major investment commitments, any strategic pivots, etc. Because if it can't do that, then who else around that table is driving that conversation?
Too right. I mean, it almost feels like the role now is more a orchestrator, because almost like when
Yes.
you're getting to this stage of going, there are many fragmented ways in which the business is built through comms, marketing, experience, and the like. And within that, there are now a huge number of specialists who are fragmented both
Yes.
within the organization, but also in
Yes.
external partners who are blooming brilliant at being able to deliver
Mm.
the most effective way to make meta advertising work or the most
Yes.
efficient way to drive affiliate returns. And is it not true that you end up in this space where you become so expert at your channel or your platform that you start to optimize the business and the way in which it acts to reflect the
Mm.
needs of the channel, as
Yes.
opposed to something which does that plus articulates a really distinctive version of what the brand is trying to be, which is reflection of everything else that you're trying to
Yeah.
say.
It's a absolutely valid point, and I think it comes down to the obsession with ROI. And of course, the most efficient thing marketing can ever do is to spend no money, because you
Mm.
can't be more efficient than investing nothing. And if ROI is I suppose the metric that marketing is to be judged by, well, frankly, we can spend next to nothing and deliver next to nothing and still report a positive return on investment. My view is that marketing has to be effective before it can be efficient. If we're
Yeah.
chasing efficiency in the face of effectiveness, then frankly, we're doomed to continue in this ever downward spiral into performance marketing at a channel level, whilst forgetting there is somebody at the end of this that is making decisions which are often, which, let's be honest, are most often based on belief, experience, perceptions, memory, pretty much everything other than rational decision making. But yet, performance marketing and channel experts are rational, skilled roles performing their optimization in isolation. And I think there's a view here, isn't there, whether the best marketeers are T-shaped. I've seen M-shaped or W-shaped. I mean, we call it whatever we like, but I suppose there has to be a realization here that customers don't think in the way that we think they do. They don't behave and make decisions in the way that we think
Yeah.
they do. And the best organizations out there understand that and go back to the basics of, in my view, marketing theory to essentially align themselves to that audience, whether somebody comes through Meta or an affiliate link or paid search or anything else for that matter. It's almost irrelevant at a overall organizational level. The most important thing is they've come to that organization and they've completed an action that they've been asked to complete. The metric that sits around it, in my view, could be anything we want it to be. At the end of the day, if there is a positive return for the business overall, surely that's the main priority. Optimizing in channel is really critical. But the danger is that in optimizing channels, all that ends up happening is that we are at best duplicating work across channels because people will come in and out of brands through every channel and medium they want to, and we can't choose to influence that really. And secondly, perhaps more worryingly, is that we fool ourselves if we think that that's the best way to drive long-term customer growth with a strong, compelling brand that really appeals to an audience, because that's just not going to cut the mustard. And we see it today. I was reading an example a couple of weeks ago of I can't remember what the water brand was. That water brand that was everywhere a couple of years ago. You couldn't get it for it had no money. It went completely viral. I can't remember what it was. I will dig it out. But essentially, that was a business that fixated itself on one metric, and it went absolutely all out on building awareness. But it never told the story as to why that product worked or why that product should be bought.
Yeah.
So it literally peaked overnight and then and pretty much has disappeared from existence. And there's almost a danger by focusing the other end of the funnel. So if we fixate on performance, it can very quickly become completely irrelevant.
It's the truth of so many of these new brands and D2C brands where you can have such early gains by being incredibly competent at
Yes.
the performance game
Yes.
to get yourself
Yes.
quick scale and quick
Yeah.
sales out of that. But then it suddenly reaches the point of where is the longevity in that approach
Yeah.
once
And
you're just
I think
busy acquiring people.
it's capitulated by social, by influencer, because it appears to be easy for brands to, achieve fairly quick success through these channels. I mean, look how big TikTok's become in so little
Yeah.
time, but yet TikTok isn't. TikTok is a I wouldn't call it a channel. It's a format for brands to engage with their audiences on. But TikTok didn't exist 5 years ago. Where will we be 5 years from now?
It's so true. I mean, we've seen this in cycles over the years of, when MySpace was new, when Facebook was new, now
Absolutely.
TikTok is new, and you start to go, there are ways on those platforms to quickly scale brands by becoming incredibly native to those platforms and following the right tropes and behaviors to grow that brand. But unless you're doing that in a way that ultimately is also building the foundations of what that brand is
Yes.
going to be in the long run, where there is a signal and a distinctive cue to what you are and
Yeah.
how you do it that has some longevity, then you're just trading on the easy wins, but you've got no long-term gains.
Yeah, it's the performance drug in another guise.
I mean, it's one of those things that I consistently talk about, of that it's very easy on the spreadsheet to start to obsess about the efficiency gains, which you can get from all of these things.
Yeah.
That today I have increased by 0.01% the conversion rate of this particular channel. And you can become really focused in on these tiny incremental gains whilst entirely ignoring the 10% shift or the two
Yes.
times
Yeah.
multiplier that you could be getting if
Yes.
you were cohesively layering in a
It's
longer
yeah.
term plan as part of that at the same time.
And I've seen that. I've seen that in my own experience with some of the other brands that I've worked in, where there's an obsession with fixing the leaky bucket. And of course, leaky buckets do need to be fixed, but a bucket needs to be filled. And there is there is this obsession with driving as much traffic to the bottom of the funnel, if we could keep it basic. But of course, there has to be traffic there. There has to be a reason for an audience to engage with the brand. And what I've always I suppose the anecdote or the metaphor I've always used internally is that you have to make the top of that bucket as wide as it possibly can be, so you get as much in as possible of relevant, targeted audiences that are right for the brand. But if you put two people in at the top and you lose one on the way, you've only got one at the bottom. If you put 10 people in at the top and you lose half of them, you've still got five at the bottom.
Yeah.
And there is the best way to grow a brand is to be more appealing to a bigger audience. It is scientifically proven. There is little point in being very targeted to a very unique audience, because we are back into that 5% versus 95% sort of space. And of course, people's needs change over time, and that 5% today will look very different in a year's time, in 2 years' time. But the 95% broadly will continue to be relatively stable. And it's the 95% where brands can, I suppose the term we always use is have a right to win. I mean,
Yeah.
no brand has a right to win anything. You have to earn the right to win something, to win a customer. And that comes through trust, credibility, and being relevant. And the model I like, the model I've tended to use in my roles is the sort of the somewhat cliche, but I think works, is the Kantar MDS framework. Because
Hmm.
it aligns very quickly and easily to the brand Z model, but you see it play out. There's a brand that's very close to what I do today, which I think are sort of ticking each one of those boxes very nicely and are growing very successfully off the back of it. And none of that is about affiliate links or PPC or SEO or advertising on Meta. Some of it is social, some of it is LinkedIn, etc. But if a brand can't be meaningful and if it can't have a real point of difference or distinctiveness, because there are different views on whether difference or distinctiveness are more important or more
Yep.
successful, and salient, then the brand has to ask the question, so why would a customer choose us? And you do have to look in the mirror sometimes. And I see it today where you see brands say, oh, we're different to so and so and so and so. Well, yeah, but why? If we can't articulate ourselves, if we can't articulate that internally, how could we expect a customer to see that or to understand it, or a target customer to get it? And it comes back to me, which is the sort of the whole point of this, is which the best brands are built from the inside out. So we
Mm.
can't claim to be a brand and claim to be something if we don't believe it ourselves, because we'll never be that thing that we claim to be. And again, you see that played out on Trustpilot, TripAdvisor, where that sort of experience falls short of the promise. And that's, in my view, because it isn't that sort of galvanizing idea internally, which everybody gets behind and understands their own individual role in owning and aligning and delivering to that proposition. That
I mean,
has to be the role of the brand going forwards. And whether that's the CMO role, whether that's the CEO's remit, it has to come out of this sort of marketing box, which is where it's been for so long. And AI will elevate that even more.
that leads on nicely to the question of AI, because there's one way of looking at all of our brands are now existing in this AI space. And you could go, well, this is just yet another platform or channel technology that's coming in. And now we need AEO and GEO specialists. And it's just another performance channel that we need to optimize for. But is that the reality of what's going to happen with this AI reckoning that is upon us now? Or is it actually going to change the imperative of how we need to
Mm.
build our brands?
And I think the answer is I don't think anybody knows wholeheartedly where the future of
Yeah.
this goes. I think the pace of change is phenomenal, and I think we all see this play out on a daily basis. And I think many organizations are now using Copilot internally. They've got their own sort of internal LLM capabilities and deliverables, but it's here to stay. I think we all know that it will change behavior. Any technological advances of this scale and pace will change behavior. I suppose it's how a brand chooses to respond to that or not, as the case may be. We're already seeing that search is evolving, and some stats show that LLM and geo search will grow to around 25% within the next sort of 12 months. That will probably vary by industry, sector, etc. But I suppose fundamentally what AI and geo search in particular does, from a performance perspective, is it suddenly elevates the role of brand, where by the nature of the way that these LLMs work, consistency and continuity matters more than ever. Trustpilot, for example, I think, and Reddit are within the top 5 cited sources for brand search results through LLMs. But yet, how many organizations are actively owning and influencing what happens on Trustpilot, or are leaning into that and thinking, well, actually, if our Trustpilot ratings are not great, that's going to play out? How many organizations are actively involved in live conversations through things like Reddit? Social media typically covers Twitter or X, the full meta gamut, LinkedIn, maybe TikTok now, but yet there's a whole kind of, I suppose, forum-based social world out there that organizations really need to get involved with. And that hasn't really changed over years. That you think back to like Mumsnet and Martin Lewis, those sorts of forums and conversations have always happened. The difference now is they get surfaced in a way that is easy and quick for people. And all of a sudden these brands have to start thinking more collectively and perhaps coherently around what is that full experience. And that to me is where AI has a real value to play into the sort of brand space, because more than ever, a brand has to be clear why it exists, what makes it different, how we show up, what is the overarching proposition, and then how do we consistently deliver against it. Any brand can go into an LLM today and see what those LLMs are saying about them. Might be good, might not be good, but you do have to lean into it. You have to start to get to grips with it. And similarly, on the flip of that, there is, and this is perhaps where I think the performance drug starts to reappear, is there is an obsession, I think, currently around using AI to make processes quicker and more efficient, whether that's creative execution, content writing, proposition design, God forbid, brand strategy development. But AI can't fix what's broken. It can't answer the questions that aren't answered today. And that's why I think the basic marketing principles and brand foundations are as essential today as they've always have been. And ironically, of course, LLMs today will typically ignore any AI generated content in producing results. So it becomes somewhat self-defeating in that respect. But we see it play out already where, we can remove a role, or we can make a process more efficient, but it isn't making it more effective. All it's doing is it's masking a problem. If the product isn't right, if the brand isn't positioned properly, if the experience is not right, AI won't fix that. It will elevate it, and it will make it ever more visible. And that to me is a real challenge that as a profession we have to get to grips with.
It's ironic, isn't it? It's almost like it's the big technological advancement which can help with the efficiency of all of these performance channels is also going to be the thing which exposes the flaws in all of those.
And I think it will. I genuinely think it will. And in some ways it's, the chicken's coming home to roost, for want of a better phrase. But if that is the vehicle or the spark that drives the conversation to, I suppose, elevate the brand role out of a pure marketing box, then I would personally welcome that. And it does then, I think, prompt that second question: well, where does it sit? Does it sit in marketing? Does it sit, somewhere else around the table? And I think any organization will have its view on that. But what it does, for me at least, is it starts to elevate that into being a collective responsibility, which it always has been, but now it's ever more critical that it has to be owned across all touch points in an organization, internally, externally. So whether that's as basic things such as narratives, positioning, language, right through to what's the experience that we offer, what are the hallmarks, how does that then play out in terms of the types of reviews that we receive, how do we act on those reviews that show that we're continuing to improve. All of that has always been, I suppose, an internal debate and an internal requirement, but now it will become ever more visible, with brands are not adopting that kind of organizational wide thinking. And maybe we would eventually see brand being a core requirement of a CEO or a COO role, where perhaps it's never been before. It typically would sit with the CMO. Maybe we'll get a chief brand officer, but there is an argument that says you can't. Too many chiefs and not enough Indians it's never a good thing either.
It's almost fascinating though, because you get a moment in time, don't you, when everyone within business obsesses about something which they know is going to be transformational to their business, but it's almost by accident or by design that it now forces that fundamental thinking of brand back onto the table through the language of AI, which perhaps elevates it within people's interest in the organization, because they're all going, how do we adapt and change for this new world? And now it's being able to go, well, actually, the realities are that the truths of the experience, the truths of our product are now being generified through the lens of AI, which means that that is how we're going to be discovered. And that is the truth which is on the table for our customers. And therefore, we have to do everything within the business to try and influence our distinction and our salience in how we show up in this, lest we just turn up a cluster of nothing.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely on the money. I think there are some businesses out there who are starting to, I think, understand that world and how to align and deliver that consistency to all of its touch points. But many, I think, are still kind of seeing the world through channels and media and optimizing within individual channels down to, in my view, somewhat short-sighted ROI metrics. And the world of AI and how quickly people will adopt that will take everybody by surprise. And I don't think any business will ever be able to get really in front of it. But being present, being in the conversation, that continuous evolution is absolutely essential. It is evolve or die, and that unfortunately is the reality of the world that we're in. I mean, remember Nokia phones? Whatever happened to those?
Small little retro re-emergence of late to be able to go into the "We Are the Dumb Phone" brand, but I'm not quite sure that's really the
Yeah,
future.
I think it's understand your audience, understand their behaviors, understand their requirements. Those fundamentals won't change. How we engage audiences, how we show up, what channels, what formats, what media, what touch points, that is in a constant state of flux. But understanding who the audience is has to be the fundamental, and that hasn't changed. But I'm surprised how many organizations can't define their target audience beyond a mosaic or a fresco profile,
Yeah.
but yet couldn't actually write a persona or tell you anything about who they are, what their needs, motivations, behaviors, worries, and perhaps more importantly, why they've chosen you.
Yeah.
That to me
Fascinating.
should be in everybody's marketing vocabulary to be able to do that at a basic level.
I mean, who do you look to, and over the years, or perhaps brands you've worked on, where you've gone, they've got it right. They've managed to create a brand which seems to be cohesive across the entirety of
Mm-hmm.
their experience, and they're ones who are probably going to flourish in this new AI world.
Yeah, so I think that I've worked for some very large brands. I've worked for absolute behemoths like Lloyds, which is, become an AI machine, if you believe everything that you see in the public domain, and going great guns with AI investment, right through to perhaps businesses that create categories like GoCompare.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fond memories and emotional attachment to GoCompare, because I think as a brand it really did understand its place in the world. Yes, it was one of four main comparison sites and still is to some degree. But what GoCompare really understood as a business was its target audience and what it was set out to deliver, both in terms of customer benefit, but also the commercial benefit off the back of it. And it was a business that was run entirely from the inside out, in the sense of understanding the basic brand proposition and customer promise, right through to how that became a cultural alignment internally. So the business became the brand, and the brand became the business, if that makes sense. And it was completely integrated and seamless. And it didn't feel like it was a difficult conversation or a difficult objective to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
If I fast forward to today, a brand that I think is doing phenomenally well in this space is Alika. So Alika Bank, which some will know, it's a relatively new entrant into the sort of SME banking space. It's been around for a few years, but has gone through a bit of a transformation over the last couple of years. If I think back to that sort of Kantar MDS framework, I think they are absolutely nailing it. As a business, they've clearly understood their target audience very well. They've understood their pain points. So what is it about business banking that SMEs really don't like or have frustrations with and is painful and just difficult? But also understood the world that these SMEs work in. So, banking is not the thing that SME leaders and owners get up in the morning to do. They get up in the morning to be successful, make money, give people jobs, make a difference. And they're salient. So they are acting as a brand in a B2B space, exactly like a B2C brand would behave. Nothing like any of its competitors are following. So you see Alika, I mean, they're currently on TV. I can't name another B2B, entirely B2B business bank that is doing that. Starling have done it in the past and now doing it again. So they are meaningful. because they've understood the pain points. They're offering something that means something and matters to their audience. They're different because they have a proposition that really leans into those audience pain points. Digital first, but understanding the nuances of, I suppose, old-fashioned banking and the need that audience have. And salient because they are acting as a B2C business, showing up in places where that audience expects them to be, not just big shiny out-of-home posters and TV adverts, but also in proper conversations through content partnerships, through big events. And around all of that, they've got a really distinctive identity and I think tone that is really starting to land. And there was a podcast I listened to a couple of weeks ago with Conrad there. I think he's their coup. And he said, look, our job is to be known as the guys with the orange bowler hat. That is what we are trying to do. So they've got their eye on global expansion. I'm sure that they'll have their eye on an IPO at some point in the future. They are kind of on that brand journey. So they are thinking about how do we build that sort of top of funnel, I guess, presence and appeal that then makes our performance marketing just much more effective, much more efficient, if we call it that, over the long term. That means we don't end up at points of diminishing return, which, let's be honest, is where most performance marketing is probably today. Certainly in my experience, anyway.
It's such a good example. I mean, it's a business which has got focus and clarity
Absolutely
right through the organisation. They know what they're trying to be. They know where they're trying to go. They know who they're trying to serve, and therefore it just allows them to go. Everything we're doing should be beholden to that aim.
Yes,
and therefore it just naturally comes through the organisation as a result of
and
that.
I think as a brand, it shows real confidence when a brand can have some fun and can start to be perhaps a little bit maverick. It takes time for a brand to have the equity to be able to do that. But there is absolute value in brands being humorous, showing a level of intelligence that perhaps makes people stop and think differently. They've run an underground campaign across London on the 6 sheets, which is, you may have seen it, which is I like a bank that, and it's a play on their name. They've done quite a lot of activity across big broadcast channels, some of which is very product based. That's where they started. As a startup, they had to do that, but they have kind of flipped into the full brand building sort of space through big broadcast channels. And I think as a bank that's very targeting SMEs, I think first of all, it says to the rest of the players in that space, look at us, wake up, you've got to start thinking differently. But more than that, I think it starts to prove that the belief that I've always had, and I think most people in our space would, that B2B decision making is exactly the same as B2C decision making. The business owners don't think differently when they go to work in the morning. It is still an emotional decision. It's still making gut instinct decisions based on what they think, what they feel. And brands that ignore that do so at their peril. To win B2B, you have to act B2C. That is the way the world works.
Fascinating. Nathan, thank you. I think we've covered off all of our points there, but
Yes.
I 100% align behind you with this thinking. And it's just old school, proper brand thinking, but applied through the lens of what we're trying to deal with today, and the need to get organizations on board with what we're trying to say with proper clarity and coherence in what we're trying to do, and then having fun with how that's expressed to make it as interesting as possible in every place which we're going into is the modern challenge that we are dealing with.
I think I use this sort of 3 C's that the brands need to have. And it's not that the brand needs to have it, the business needs to have it, the people in the business needs to have it, which is clarity. We have to have clarity, because if we don't have clarity, what's the opposite? Confusion. No one will ever succeed in confusion. We have to have courage. So that ability to stand up and stand for something, we have to have that. And we have to have consistency, because that is what builds brands. Being consistent, being continuous, forming memory structures over time is the only way the brands can get built. How many brands do we see where there's, they go through an identity change or a positioning change every sort of 12 months? It's no surprise those brands don't succeed in the long term because nobody knows first of all, nobody knows what they stand for. But secondly, every kind of memory building foundation is challenged every so often. So that brand is being broken repeatedly over time, and audiences are being asked to think differently. Well, that goes against the grain of how the mind works.
I'm not going to be. I'm going to be biased. I love those three C's because we consistently talk about clarity, conviction, and cohesion, which is essentially the same three things. And if you could be applying that across the business, then it starts to make sense of everything. But the hard thing is to actually, when you address it head on, going, do we genuinely have this? That provokes bigger fundamental discussions within an organization, but it's the one which we ultimately need to have.
A strong brand can't fix a bad product, and a bad product can't fix a weak brand. So the brand can't exist in isolation, but it is not a band-aid over things that are not right. And Mark Ritson has always been of the view that the biggest things to grow a business, you have to have a great product and you have to be in a growing market. Yes, but a great product won't sell itself. And a growing market is attractive to many brands. So what is it that's pulling that audience to you?
Well, Nathan, Mark Ritson quote's always a good way to wrap things up, but that is wonderful. And this will form part of a wider discussion across a number of CMOs in different categories. Well, hopefully we'll start to see a level of cohesion across all of our perspectives of what we are trying to get. And ultimately, we'll start to bring this out in the brand alignment gap report so we can have something which we can all collectively work on and continue to discuss around, because I think this is the discussion of our times. But thank you again so much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Nick. Speak soon.